For a lot of beekeepers, this is your favorite tool. And I'm going to tell you today why this one is mine, the observation beehive. Welcome back to another edition of Enjoy Beekeeping, everyone. This is a great way to get into a hive and check it out. You can pry apart all those sticky frames and take a look and see how your bees are doing. But what's even more cool is to not have to disturb your bees at all. And this is why I like to have an observation beehive right here, because I can just take a look through the glass and get a good snapshot of everything that's happening out in the bee yard. And just a little history about this particular colony is this was an early season swarm that I caught right out of one of my own horizontal hives. And if you're using horizontal beehives like the Layens hive or the Lazutin hives, and they're well insulated, you'll find that they cast some pretty good sized swarms early, which is great because when the honey flow is just starting, that's what your bees need as far as resources, so they can go ahead and build up, start a new colony fresh somewhere else. I don't like late season swarms, and I actually have one out in the bee yard that we're going to go check out in a minute. And I want to show you what the difference is between an early season swarm and a late season swarm. But let's get back to the subject of swarming just a little bit here, because when I got that swarm, it was about a 6 or 7 pounder, and I had trouble getting them in here because they really didn't want this small of a space. This has 9 Langstroth frames, so it's almost as big as a 10 deep. So if you're one of those Langstroth users, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This one is 1 frame short, but it's close enough. And the bees can live in this 24/7, 365. The only thing is I never harvest anything out of them. I just let them keep everything that they harvest. And everything in here is just for the bees, and it's only for you to look at so that you can see what's going on in the rest of your apiary. So anyway, let's talk about that swarm just a little bit. So I caught that swarm, got them in here, and because they were such a big swarm, they built up like crazy. They built up so fast. In about 3 weeks' time, they had all the frames drawn. They had honey packed into the corners of every single one of these frames, which we still have. We still got tons of resources in here. And it wasn't long before, you know, they had they went through 1 brood cycle, and then they were almost ready to bust the glass out. And then by the time the second brood cycle was hatching, so remember each brood cycle is 21 days, so it was only about a month and a half now into this colony's history that they were ready to swarm. And I knew it was going to happen. In fact, the whole family knew it was going to happen. They said, "Dad, why'd you put those bees in there? They need more room than that." And I said, "Well, because I was so excited to have bees in the observation hive." So I shook them in here and they swarmed. But here's why that's a good thing. A lot of times beekeepers will try to do everything they can to prevent their bees from swarming. So one of the things they do is they'll just go on and add supers onto their beehive. So if they're stacking them up, if you're one of those vertical beekeepers, you're stacking up the beehives, you're putting supers on to make them taller and to give them lots of room to expand. Well, that sometimes works, but a lot of times it doesn't. Trust me, I've done it that way for years, and if the bees have made up their mind to swarm, they're going to do it no matter how much you give them. And even if you're a horizontal beekeeper like me, I'm predominantly using Layens hives. I've got a few Lazutin hives as well. Even those hives will swarm, and the reason why is because they build up. And I've got some colonies that are well established now, 4, 5, 6 years now. And year after year, they don't even have a follower board in them anymore. So my Layens hives hold about 21, 22 frames. That seems to be ideal for my climate zone. I suggest you try that number as well. Stay away from the 14s. I'm not crazy about that. Use the 20. Expand your model to fit 20 to 22 frames, somewhere in there. I think you're going to be happier. Some of you guys might even want to try 30. I think that's a little overkill. I think that's more than you'll ever need. But if you're going to house 2 colonies, I'd say a 30 might be the one to go with. And let's just get back to this one though. So the horizontal hives, even the Layens hives, will throw a swarm early in the year, and that's because the brood doesn't get chilled like they do in a thin-walled hive. So that brood doesn't get chilled, and you don't really have any losses, so those numbers build up very quickly. And for me, by the time late February rolls around, it's already starting to look like it's about that time. So as soon as March rolls around, sometimes the very first day of March, I'll see swarms already being thrown, and I'm talking big ones, guys. You guys have probably seen what a 3-pound package looks like. I get swarms that are double, and sometimes they even look like they're triple. I don't know, but I'm sure that I've got some 6 or 7 pound swarms. The one that came in here, probably a 6 or 7 pounder, no problem. I mean, this thing was massive. So anyway, what's really good about swarming, so a lot of times people freak out, oh my gosh, my bees are going to swarm, what do I do? Some beekeepers even cut the wings of the queen bee, so that she can't fly out with a swarm. Well, I don't do that. I practice natural management. I let the bees do everything that they would normally do if I wasn't in the picture. So it's kind of like I tell people, have you ever put a birdhouse in your tree, in your backyard? That's kind of how I keep bees. I don't go inside my birdhouse and pick the lid up and take a look and see how they're doing, or feed the babies little worms. I don't do anything with the birdhouse. Same thing with my bees. I catch bees, I put them in hives. For the most part, I'm never in there. I leave them alone. That's why I like the observation beehive so much, because I'm a big believer in minimal disruption of the colony. They don't really want you in there. I know it's fun to go in a beehive. They don't really want you in there. So this is a great way to have the best of both worlds. This gives me a snapshot of everything that's going on in the bee yard. So when they throw a swarm, so here's the thing to keep in mind. A lot of times people freak out, oh my gosh, my bees are swarming. I must stink as a beekeeper. That's what I used to think. I used to think, man, I'm a loser, failure beekeeper. Maybe some of you think I am still, but that's okay. But here's the deal. The bees know when the best time to swarm is. And if you give them the conditions that they need to raise a good colony, a nice, big, robust brood colony in early spring, they're going to pick the best day to swarm. And if you've got swarm traps hanging up on your property or near your property, that's a great way to recapture those swarms. So if you're a work from home guy, like me, I work from home quite a bit, and I can look out the window and I can see a big clump of bees hanging on a bush or one of my fruit trees, and I can go out there and shake them down if I want to. But I also keep swarm traps on the property. That's a great way to do it. So let's talk about why swarming is so good. Okay, so you wondered, is swarming good at all? Because everybody that I'm talking to says you got to do everything you can to keep your bees from swarming. Now, it's true, if you want a big honey crop, you're probably going to want as many bees as possible. But when you're a natural beekeeper and you're not stimulating your bees by feeding them, they're going to want to divide themselves and cast reproductive swarms in order to keep those generations going and going and going. And this is a natural urge that the bees have. So when you try to suppress it, remember, you're fighting nature, okay? You're fighting nature right now. So I choose not to fight nature. I'm going to go with nature, which means I'm going to get less honey. I'm okay with that. I don't need to eat that much honey. The bees give me plenty, but I want to make sure they got plenty. So that swarm that I captured and put in this observation beehive, they built this thing out in no time. About the second brood cycle, they threw a swarm. I think they threw 3. I know they did 2 for sure. They might have thrown 3. I caught 1 behind my barn. I got the queen, and their colony is doing fantastic, and they left a small remnant of bees. And the reason why swarming is so important is because it cleanses the colony. Parasites build up, pathogens build up when they don't swarm. The number one predator that a lot of people talk about are varroa mites. Now, varroa mites will eat brood, the baby bees that are in the hive. So remember, brood is the food for those varroa mites. Now, when you take away their food source, guess what? The varroa mites die. The bees somehow know this too. So when they throw a swarm, they actually go broodless because there's no queen. So she ain't laying eggs, there ain't nobody to lay eggs. They're raising baby queens. Every time they throw a swarm, they've already got queen cells all over the place in here. Mama leaves with about half the bees or more and leaves behind a remnant of bees with some queens that are hatching. But during the time that those queens hatch, fly out and mate and return to start the whole process over again, there's a broodless period. And during that time, a lot of those varroa mites die off, if not completely, which is awesome. So just like you, if you've ever gone on a health fast, so for those of you who do things naturally and like the holistic approach to health, I'm one of those guys too. I periodically do all water fasts, or sometimes I do juice fasts. That cleanses your body. It helps rid your body of junk that it doesn't need, parasites, pathogens. It makes it really inhospitable for them. So the bees are doing the same thing when they swarm. Now, another really good benefit of the swarm is it keeps the circle of life thing going. You heard of that, right? You guys watch Disney movies, circle of life? Yeah, well, that's what they're doing here too. They're keeping the circle of life going. So what they've done, that colony that was here right before they swarmed, they made sure this thing was stocked full. This thing is slap full of honey. If I try to pick this thing up now, it's super heavy. They've got so much honey and pollen stored all over, and guess what? There's only about 1/3 of the bees left. So guess what? They're stocked, and there's not that many mouths to feed. Isn't that great? Nature's wisdom in action right here. Now, what about the swarm that left? What are their odds? Well, they're playing the odds. They've taken the higher risk. And the thing to keep in mind is they're experienced. They've done this before, and they're good at what they do, and they brought enough bees with them early enough in the season that they can build up again and get established and be ready for springtime next year. So those are the benefits of swarming, because it allows your bees to cleanse, and it also allows them to keep the circle of life going. And if you're like me and you're hanging swarm traps up around your property, you can catch those swarms, and you don't even have to worry about going into your hives and making splits. I used to split all the time. I used to make split, and I had a success rate of about 60-40, maybe 70-30. So most of the time it would work, but I always had about a 30 or 40% that I had to kind of recombine with queen-right colonies, just because they couldn't get their queens mated or something happened. Sometimes the queen will fly off on a mating flight, and then a thunderstorm will pop up and she'll drown out there if it's one of these big old gully washers that we get. Or maybe a bird gets her in the air, who knows. Things happen out there in nature, right? So that 60-40, 70-30, I decided, you know what? The bees have a way higher success rate when they throw their own swarms. It's probably more in the lines of 90-10 or 95-5. They pick the right day, they pick the right amount of bees, and they pick the right time. They just got it all down. So I figured, you know what? I'm not going to fight nature anymore. I'm going to let them make that call. Now, I want to show you why I'm not real crazy about late season swarms. I've got a swarm that I caught outside, and we're going to go out there in just a minute. I hang my swarm traps up at some of my buddies' houses, and I got a call about 3 weeks ago, and he says, hey, guess what? I see bees here now. And so now if you go back 3 weeks, that's middle May. For me, that's a late season swarm. I don't really like getting bees any later than May 1st. They need time to build up. So May is they got a full 30 days that they can go out, find the resources they need to build up. Well, by the time the middle of May's come, I mean, we're talking, you've got 2 good weeks, and that's it. Because the odds of them surviving are lower, because there's just not much to forage during June and July and part of August here in Northeast Georgia. It's terrible. In fact, that's when you can lose bees to starvation. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to put those bees into their permanent hive, and we're going to do something I don't normally do, and we're going to feed them. So I've already mixed up a batch of honey water that we're going to use as a little housewarming gift. We're going to put it in there for them, because you've got 2 choices this late in the season. You catch a swarm this late in the season, it's probably, it could die, it could starve out by August or September, or just get attacked by predators. Predators could be other bees. In fact, the little bit of stores that they have, the bees could easily, in the surrounding areas, they could come in, rob whatever stores they do have. They can get attacked by wax moths and beetles. It's a really tough time in the hot part of summer here during the dearth. So we're going to go out there, put them in their hive, and give them a little housewarming gift and make sure that they have a good start. So our dearth here in my climate zone in Northeast Georgia starts around the first week of June. So today is June, I think it's 13th, June 13th. And so we're already into the dearth. So that means it's hard for the bees to build up, because there's not a lot of resources. So What I saw when I got the swarm out of the tree was one of the first things I expected, and that is that the swarm trap itself was lightweight. When I took it down out of the tree, it's nothing like one of my early season swarms. That thing had already been in the tree for about 3 weeks, maybe even a month. And here it was, a lightweight swarm that I took down. So the reason for that is because there just wasn't enough resources for them to build out completely on all the frames. So I haven't even opened it yet. So what I'm expecting to see when I open it is frames that are halfway drawn and very little resources in it. So what we've done, just to be sure they have a good start, is we've taken some honey water and we've already installed it in the hive, and I've just mixed that up for them to give them a good start. And it may require that we feed them throughout the dearth in order to keep them alive. So your choices are, if you're like me, I don't usually feed my bees. I make them depend on what's happening in nature to calibrate themselves to the environment. So they should build up when it's time to build up, save up those stores, then kind of ride out those times of lean, like during the dearth or in winter. I suspect that this swarm may have been cast from somebody who's keeping bees and it was feeding them, and if the hive gets honey bound, that is, they packed all that sugar water into the cells where the queen would normally lay, they simply ran out of room and they were forced to throw a swarm at an inconvenient time. So sometimes you get those. I prefer to sell those to other beekeepers, but here they are. I'm not going to let them die, so my choices are to feed them or let them die, which I'm not going to do. So we're going to feed them to make sure they get off to a good start, and we may have to check in on them once or twice every week to make sure they've got enough to survive. So let's go ahead and open them up and see if we're correct about my prediction that the frames are only halfway drawn. And hopefully we've got a good laying queen and everything else looks pretty good, and we can just make sure that they have everything they need to continue. So let's get in there now, and I'm going to move this just a little more forward. Now I've already put them in position. Now they've been here now for about 2 days in this spot, so they've gotten accustomed to flying to this location. So I've got the swarm trap right in front of the entrance where I want them to go in. So that's good. They've dialed in, and they're about 6 or 7 miles away from where we got them. So they had no trouble at all adjusting. There's no bees that are going to be lingering in that spot 6 or 7 miles away. They're going to be right here. And so let's open them up now. Now I've got my veil because this time of year, boy, they can go from being happy bees to kind of cranky bees because there's not a lot to forage, and they get real protective. So let's open them up. I got my veil ready just in case. And we've got, how many frames? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 frames. So it's a 7-frame swarm trap. And we're going to take them out one at a time and put them in the same order that we took them out. So let's see what they got on the next frame over. Looks like we might need to do a little cutting. I got a little bit of cross comb. So we got our handy dandy tree cutter, limb cutter. So we're going to cut that piece of cross comb right here. So we've got a frame of a little bit of everything, a little bit of brood, a little bit of honey, and like I say, it is cross comb, and I actually cut through some brood there, but that was the only way to get it to release. So we'll put it in, let the bees repair that. When they're cross comb like that, it's probably because the tree, there wasn't, I shouldn't say the tree. When they're cross comb like that, it's sometimes because the hive's not perfectly level. But I'm really careful about making sure they're level. So it could just be that they're just cross combed. That's the way it goes sometimes. So they got brood hatching, and look at that. That's about all the progress they've made. You know, halfway down. And that's going to be it. But I can't leave it open too long because of the time of year we're in now. All right, let's keep moving. Got 4 frames left. And so they're all cross combed just a little bit. I don't know if I can do 4 at once. Let me try. Can we pick up 4? I don't know. Let's see. Let's get my fingers around it. turn it so I can lift it all out at once. Like I say, they're only half frames. There we go. Just got to keep a tight grip. Let's move them in fast. There's 1 or 2 hive beetles already in there. Doesn't take long for them beetles to get in. All right, I'm going to look around to see if there's a queen bee running around inside before I bump them. I prefer not to bump her on the ground. I want her to go in with the rest of the bees that we moved on the frames. Yeah, I don't see her. So we picked up all 4 frames that were left. Here's the first 3 here. Okay, so all we got to do is just slide them together. Try not to squish bees. Squishing bees makes them angry. If you can just be gentle, take your time. There we go. All right, good. Got them all in. Okay, so I'm missing my follower board. Normally I would drop a follower board right here. Even though we got the whole rest of the year in front of us, they're not even going to build this out. There's not enough resources, so they can reach their honey water on that side. They'll find that in just a minute. I'm just going to set these cover boards in place because I also use a different type of layens frame. It's a type that I've modified from Langstroth frames that has a 3/8 gap in between each one. So if you see what I do here, when I drop one of these in, it leaves a small gap right here. All I'm going to do is put cover boards over the whole hive so that they can access the honey water that we've got for them. And let's bring the camera around here so you can see. Okay, so let's just take a look inside. And there they are. They're doing okay. They got funky comb going on here, so I'm going to maybe take a piece of, I've got one of these. I got one of these left from last year, and it's drawn down pretty good. So I think I'm actually going to use that to help them to draw a straight comb from here on out the rest of the way. So that'll sort of act as a follower board or an ending for the colony. And you can see there's the honey water right there, and there's the empty comb that we're going to give them. All right, so let's cover them up. So, not all layens hives require cover boards. It just so happens that I was using frames with gaps, so I had to use cover boards. If I fill this entirely with frames that touch, the top bars all touching nice and tight like you see here, I wouldn't need these, but I can't leave this all open for a number of reasons. I don't want hive beetles getting in here. I don't want robber bees getting in here. So we're going to cover it back up and just put all these boards into place right here. Yeah. They can go pretty much, and they should be good and snug. I like a really snug fit, and this is really snug. I don't even think I'll need to tuck in any Swiffer wipes. You know, a lot of times you folks see me on my channel, I use those Swiffer wipes and I tuck them in any cracks, and these are pretty, this one's pretty snug. These cover boards were cut really good, so I'm not seeing an issue for hive beetles. That's my main concern here in the south, is these hive beetles that get in. You want the bees to control the main entrance. So we're just going to close them up, and we're going to bump these bees in front. Well, that's fun. And you saw on those frames, they're not going to build anymore. And I don't even have to worry about adding frames in that hive. I can just leave that section of the hive empty. I don't even have to worry about putting frames in until next year. There's not enough resources right now to build up. Even if I keep that sugar water going, they're not going to build anything. So I don't have to worry if there's no frames in there. I've got to get back to the wood shop and start building them. But I hope you had some fun checking this video out, and I hope that you learned a few things about swarming and why it's actually a good thing. And guys, I hope you're having a fun time keeping bees wherever you may be in the world. And until the next video, keep on enjoying beekeeping. We'll see you next time.